Part 3, My Shore Adventure. Chapter 13, How My Shore Adventure Began. The appearance of the island when I came on deck next morning was altogether changed. Although the breeze had now utterly ceased, we made a great deal of way during the night, and were now lying becalmed about half a mile to the southeast of the low eastern coast. Gray-colored woods covered a large part of the surface. This even tint was indeed broken up by streaks of yellow and sandbrake in the lower lands, and by many tall trees of the pine family, out-topping the others, some singly, some in clumps. But the general coloring was uniform and sad. The hills ran up clear above the vegetation in spires of naked rock. All were strangely shaped, and the spyglass, which was by 300 or 400 feet the tallest on the island, was likewise the strangest in configuration, running up sheer from almost every side, and then suddenly cut off at the top like a pedestal to put a statue on. The Hispaniola was rolling scuppers under in the ocean swell. The booms were tearing in at the blocks, the rudder was banging to and fro, the whole ship creaking, groaning, and jumping like a manufactory. I had to cling tight to the backstay, and the world turned giddily before my eyes. For though I was good enough sailor when there was a way on, this standing still and being rolled about like a bottle was a thing I had never learned to stand without a qualm or so, above all in the morning on an empty stomach. Perhaps it was this, perhaps it was the look of the island with its gray, melancholy woods and the wild stone spires, and the surf that we could both see and hear foaming and thundering on the steep beach. At least, although the sun shone bright and hot, and the shore birds were fishing and crying all around us, and you would have thought that anyone would have been glad to get land after being so long lost at sea. My heart sank, as the saying is, into my boots, and from the first look onward I hated the very thought of Treasure Island. We had a dreary morning's work before us, for there was no sign of any wind, and the boats had to be got out and manned, and the ship warped 3 or 4 miles round the corner of the island, and up the narrow passage to the haven beyond the skeleton island. I volunteered for one of the boats where I had, of course, no business. The heat was sweltering, and the men grumbled fiercely over their work. Anderson was in command of my boat, and instead of keeping the crew in order, he grumbled as loud as the worst. "Well," he said with an oath, "it's not forever." I thought this was a very bad sign, for up to that day the men had gone briskly and willingly about their business, but the very sight of the island had relaxed the cords of discipline. All the way in, Long John stood by the steersman and conned the ship. He knew the passage like the palm of his hand, and although the man in chains got everywhere more water than was down in the chart, John never hesitated once. "There's a strong scour with the ebb," he said, "and here's a passage has been dug out, in a manner of speaking, with a spade." We brought up just where the anchor was in the chart, about 1/3 of a mile from each shore, and the mainland on one side and Skeleton Island on the other. The bottom was clean sand. The plunge of our anchor sent up clouds of birds wheeling and crying over the woods, but in less than a minute they were down again, and all was once more silent. The place was entirely landlocked, buried in the woods, the trees coming right down to the high water mark, the shores mostly flat, and the hilltops standing round at a distance in a sort of amphitheater. One here, one there, 2 little rivers, or rather 2 swamps, emptied out into this pond, as you might call it, and the foliage round that part of the shore had a kind of poisonous brightness. From the ship we could see nothing of the house or stockade, for they were buried among the trees, and if it had not been for the chart on the companion, we might have been the first that had ever anchored there since the island arose out of the seas. There was not a breath of air moving, nor a sound, but that of the surf booming half a mile away, along the beaches and against the rocks. A peculiar stagnant smell hung over the anchorage, a smell of sodden leaves and rotting tree trunks. I observed the doctor sniffing and sniffling, like someone tasting a bad egg. "I don't know about Treasure," he said, "but I'll stake my wig there's fever here." If the conduct of the men had been alarming in the boat, it became truly threatening when they had come aboard. They lay about the deck growling together and talk. The slightest order was received with a black look, and grudgingly and carelessly obeyed. Even the honest lads must have caught the infection, for there was not one hand aboard to mend another. Mutiny, it was plain, hung over us like a thundercloud. And it was not only we of the cabin party who perceived the danger. Long John was hard at work going from group to group, spending himself in good advice, and as, for example, no man could have shown better. He fairly outstripped himself in willingness and civility. He was all smiles to everyone, and if an order were given, John would be on his crutch in an instant with the cheeriest "Aye, aye, sir," in the world. And there was nothing else to do. He kept up one song after another, as if to conceal the discontent of the rest. All of the gloomy features of that gloomy afternoon, this obvious anxiety on the part of Long John appeared the worst. We held a council in the cabin. "Sir," said the captain, "if I risk another order, the whole ship will come about on our ears by the run. You see, sir, here it is. I get a rough answer, do I not? Well, if I speak back, Pikes will be going into shakes. If I don't, Silver will see there's something under that, and the game's up. Now we've only one man to rely on." "And who's that?" asked the squire. "Silver, sir," returned the captain, "and he's as anxious as you and I to smother things up. This is a tiff. He'd soon talk him out of it if he had the chance, and what I propose to do is give him the chance. Let's allow the men an afternoon ashore. If they all go, why, we'll fight the ship. If none of them go, well, then we hold the cabin, and God defend the right. If some go, you mark my words, sir, Silver will bring 'em aboard again as mild as lambs." It was so decided. Loaded pistols were served out to all the sure men. Hunter, Joyce, Redruth were taken into our confidence and received the news with no less surprise and better spirit than we had looked for. And the captain went on deck and addressed the crew. "My lads," said he, "we've had a hot day and are tired and out of sorts. A turn ashore will hurt nobody. The boats are still in the water. You can take to the gigs and get as many as you please go ashore for the afternoon. I'll fire a gun half an hour before sundown." I believe the silly fellows must have thought they would break their shins over treasure as soon as they landed, for they all came out of their sulks in a moment and gave a cheer that started an echo in a far-away hill and sent the birds once more flying and squalling around the anchorage. The captain was too bright to be in the way. He whipped out of sight in a moment, leaving Silver to arrange a party, and I fancied it was as well he did so. Had he been on deck, he could no longer so much as pretended not to understand the situation. It was as plain as day. Silver was a captain, and a mighty rebellious crew he had of it. The honest hands, and I was soon to see it proved that there were such aboard, must have been very stupid fellows. Or rather, I suppose the truth was this, that all hands were disaffected by the example of the ringleaders, only some more, some less, and a few, being good fellows in the main, could neither be led nor driven any further. It is one thing to idle and skulk, and quite another to take a ship and murder a number of innocent men. At last, however, the party was made up. 6 fellows were to stay on board, and the remaining 13, including Silver, began to embark. Then it was there that came into my head the first of the mad notions that contributed so much to save our lives. If 6 men were left by Silver, it was plain that our party could not take and fight the ship. And since only 6 were left, it was equally plain that the cabin party had no present need of my assistance. It occurred to me to go at once ashore. In a jiffy I had slipped over the side and curled up in the fore sheets of the nearest boat, and almost at the same moment she shoved off. No one took notice of me, only the bow oar saying, "Is that you, Jim? Keep your head down." But Silver from the other boat looked sharply over and called out to know if it were me, and from that moment I began to regret what I had done. The crews raced for the beach, but the boat I was in, having some start and being at once the lighter and the better man, shot far ahead of her consort, and the bow had struck along the shoreside trees, and I caught a branch and swung myself out and plunged into the nearest thicket, while Silver and the rest were still 100 yards behind. "Jim! Jim!" I heard him shouting, but you may suppose I paid no heed, jumping and ducking and breaking through. I ran straight before my nose till I could run no longer. This is the end of chapter 13. So Jim, on his own mind, decided to sneak into one of the boats going ashore, hoping maybe to figure out something, some secret, figure out something that's going on. Long John saw him. Everybody saw him, or a bunch of people saw him. We don't know if the squire and Dr. Levesi saw him, but he is in he is on the island running through the woods. Now they mentioned swamp, and swamp water is very, very bad for you. Um Never drink water from the swamp because that is sure to make you sick. Always look for clean water. The further up the better. Um yeah, just don't go drinking strange water is probably the best suggestion. But the doctor said he smelled fever. And yellow fever is probably what he was referring to. It may have been dengue that he was referring to. But there are all sorts of tropical fevers that you find in jungles, and they are carried by mosquitoes. And mosquitoes like stagnant water. So, while the doctor himself was not actually smelling the yellow fever, the dengue, the whatever, malaria is another one, wasn't actually smelling the malaria, he was smelling the stagnant water. And the stagnant water leads to mosquitoes, and mosquitoes, as I said, lead to, no, mosquitoes carry the viruses that cause these things, or the parasites. It's not all of them's viruses, but anyway, the mosquitoes carry the things, and they like the swampy water. So try not to leave buckets and whatever of water to grow stagnant. So water piling up somewhere for a day is okay. 3 or 4 days, not good. You can see sometimes you can see little minnows or little mosquito larvae swimming around in the water. And well, it's kind of cool to look at. In a couple of days, they'll pupate. That's not the word. Anyway, they'll change into grown-up mosquitoes, which fly around and bite you and transmit dengue and malaria and all sorts of other bad things. Now, there's not much of this in Nebraska, so you don't have to worry about it. But it's still a general good idea to keep buckets of water, or to not keep buckets of water. Back when your dad was at scout camp, when he was 12 years old or so, they had buckets of water on all of the tents. 2 buckets of water in case there was a fire. And then a couple years later, there was an outbreak of a mosquito-transmitted illness. Didn't kill very many people. It made a few people sick. It's called West Nile, which was a virus. It almost wiped out the crow population. Because this is one of those diseases that birds can get to. Anyway, West Nile, and because of the West Nile, what they did was they decided it wasn't good to have buckets of stagnant water, so they got rid of the buckets of stagnant water, and were just even more careful about, hey, this is what you have to do in case of a fire, because they figured that the danger of the mosquitoes was actually worse than the danger of the fire. Now, mosquitoes actually are responsible for lots and lots and lots of deaths every year. Because, as I said, they carry malaria, and malaria is just all over the place in Africa. And in Africa, it kills 1 million people a year. So, I mean, that's just like this insane number of people who die from mosquitoes. And there have been different things that have been tried to take care of the mosquitoes, to wipe them out so that people don't end up getting malaria and dying. And there's some drugs to treat malaria, but they tend not to be very pleasant. But anyway, so the doctor smelled the fever in the water. The men are going after the gold. And Jim is in the woods. I'm not sure why. Jim usually makes good decisions, but this one I'm not so sure about. We shall see what happens.